Just by way of background, as you probably, I'm a lawyer and I've been involved with bankruptcy work for over 30 years. Because of my bankruptcy work, I also got involved with foreclosure work, and now the debt du jour is student loans. And I've been doing research and working in this area for about the last 3 years. Today's presentation, I'm just going to give you a brief overview of where student loans stand at this point. And we're going to focus after that just on federal loans. Now, there are state loans, there are private loans, and there's bankruptcy aspects, but we don't have an hour and a half. So I'm going to try to get this done as quickly as we can under the circumstances. Okay, at this point, in our country, we have $1.44 roughly trillion in student loan debt. That's more than credit cards, car loans, or second mortgages. And probably the reason for that is that the cost of college and graduate school over the last 20 plus years has increased at about 2.5 times the rate of inflation. For 2016, 2017, the College Board estimated that people who have gone through a private college are spending for room and board and tuition $45,000 a year. That's across the country. And for public colleges, $21,000. Now, we know from our scholarship interviews that the students in this area are paying a lot more than $45,000. The average student comes out of college with $37,000 in student loan debt. The average law student comes out with about $120,000. The average medical student comes out with usually over $200,000. The delinquency rate is 11.2%. That was as of last year. That's 90 days delinquent or in default for private loans. A lot of people call me up and I ask them for general information, and they don't have it. They tell me that their loan is with Navient, and sometimes Sallie Mae, which was the predecessor to Navient before the split up, did make loans, and they also made federal and private loans. But Navient and Sallie Mae split up in 2014, and their servicing arm became Navient. I have a lot of people there telling me their servicer is their lender, just like I did in the mortgage, during the mortgage crisis. People would call me up and they'd tell me that their loan is with so-and-so. Why? Because that's who they got their bill from. But at any rate, we have lenders on the federal side. It's basically the Department of Education, either directly as a guarantor or through grants to colleges. There are state loans. In New Jersey, we have the New Jersey class loans. Word of advice, avoid them. And in private, we have Sallie Mae, Discover, and major banks. The services, as I said, Navient, Fed Loan Servicing handles public service debt relief areas. Great Lakes Educational, Nelnet, those are examples. Their job is to send out the bills, collect the money, send the money to the lender, keep records, and forward defaulted loans to debt collectors. Now, what they're supposed to do is also, an important function of the servicer, is to educate the student about what their options are on repayment. They don't do that. Now, part of it is probably because the people who get on the phone with you are not adequately trained and are making about 10 bucks an hour and could care less. So you have a fair amount, by the time people get to me, there's usually a fair amount of frustration on their part. As I said, once the servicers, there's a default, they sign off to debt collectors. And examples of those are National Recovery's NCO and Pioneer, which is a subsidiary of Navient. Sometimes it gets to litigation. With the federal loans, it's usually if there are a large amount of money involved, U.S. attorneys get involved. Otherwise, it goes to private attorneys, collection attorneys. The same thing for private loans or state loans, they use private law firms. Now we're going to basically focus on federal loans from here on. The major programs, the first was the Federal Family Education Loan Program, FFEL. That was created in 1965, but it was phased out in July of 2010. But even though it was phased out, there's still about $312 billion worth of FFEL loans. In FFEL loans, the lenders were Navient, or Sally Mae in those days, and private banks. The system was set up that there was a system of there was a series of guarantees. All right, on the first level, guarantee agencies are usually state agencies. In New Jersey, that's the HESAA. If there's a default, the bank sells the loan to the guarantee agency, and the guarantee agency comes after you. But if they don't want to come after you, they could ultimately sell the loan back to the Department of Education and get paid off on that. The direct loan program was created in 1993. The lender, they call it direct because the direct lender is the Department of Education. Right now, there's over $1 trillion of direct loans. Perkins loans are much smaller. It's about $8.3 billion of Perkins loans. They're for students with exceptional financial need. Basically, the lender is the school who obtains the money through DOE grants. The types of loans is Stafford, Parent Plus, Grad Plus, and Perkins. Stafford, Grad Plus, and Perkins, the borrower is the student. I want to focus on the Parent Plus loan because that's a dangerous loan. The borrower is the parent, not the student. They do a credit check. They will lend you the cost of attendance minus any other aid that you receive. Now, when you figure that the average Stafford loan is somewhere between $5,000 and $7,000, depending on what school you're in, a Parent Plus loan could become very large. All right? Now, it's unsubsidized. That means that you pay interest from day one. And it's not deferred, which means your first payment is due the next month. Now, here's the kicker. There's a 4.27% origination fee. That's 4.25 points on the loan, and it's 7% interest. That is a killer loan. And what I try to tell people is, please, be very, very careful because you're stepping on a landmine when you get these loans. Because you figure $25,000, before you know it, you're up to $100,000 in 4 years, and they're banging you at 7% interest.
It's like a loan shark.
Well, it's high. For Stafford, it's 4.75%. So you can see that there's a big difference. The Grad Plus is also an expensive loan, but the Grad Stafford limits are fairly high. So not too many students get involved with Grad Plus loans. Just an overview of what you can get. Stafford undergraduate, 31. If you're an independent student, meaning your parents are not supporting you and you can prove it, you can borrow up to $57,500. The Stafford grad goes up to $138,000. Med school, $224,000. Perkins undergrad is $27,500, and Perkins grad is $60,000. Now, these loans, the Perkins and the Stafford come in subsidized and unsubsidized. Subsidized means that while you're in school, the government pays your interest, and also during your deferment period. Now, those are great loans to get, but that's usually the smaller percentage of the loan. What you have, other than the subsidized, is the unsubsidized, which means the interest accrues. You don't have to make payments, but what happens, say you borrow $20,000, by the time you get out of school, you owe maybe $24,000 to $25,000. So what I tell people is if they could afford to pay the interest on a yearly basis, to pay that off, because the interest compounds and then you're paying interest on interest after a while with these loans. All right, now the repayment plans. The federal loans are noted for having flexibility in their repayment plans. But here's the key you have to understand. There's no free ride. There's flexibility, but the feds are going to get their money. The student loan program is one of the few areas in the federal government that the government actually makes money on. So although they talk about reform in the paper and they talk about free this and free that, they're not going to do it because they're making money on it. All right, the standard is 10 years fully amortized. If you don't pick a different plan, you get defaulted into that. and you can have that extended. The graduated starts low and increases over time with the idea that you'll be making more money as time goes on. And that's paid in 10 years. If you owe over $30,000, you can gradually extend the payment out to 15 years, 20 or 25 years on a fixed or graduated basis. Now that gets us to the income-driven repayment plans. That's a generic term. The basic formula, there's about 5 different plans right now. The basic formula is between 10 and 20% of your adjusted gross income minus the 100 to 150% of the poverty level. Now, if you're not working or if you're making hardly any money, your payment could be 0. But think about it. The interest is accruing, so we have what in effect is a negative amortization law. The payments are extended for 20 to 25 years, depending on the program. At the end of 25 years, they will forgive your balance, but they send a 1099 to the IRS, and the IRS comes after you for the taxes on that. So it's, who would you rather have coming after you, the Department of Education or the IRS? The basic plans are the ICR, IBR, pay and repay. The ICR is the only plan, income-driven repayment plan, that a parent can use for a Parent Plus loan. It's also the most expensive. That's the one that's 20% of AGI. There are deferments and forbearances. You're deferred for 6 months until 6 months after you finish school. They don't come to you for payments, although the interest does accrue. You get a deferment if you go back to graduate school, if you're in the military. Now, there are other deferments that we use for economic hardship or unemployment, but then we get into the second category, forbearances. The deferment is a formal written application. A forbearance they can give you over the telephone. And the servicers are using that because they don't want to sit down and work with you on a payment program. If you call up and you say you have a problem, they say, don't worry, we'll put you in a forbearance. Now, it was set up, or forbearance was a short-term relief for a student loan debtor. But now they're giving out up to 3 years on forbearances. So what they're doing is they're trying to avoid the paperwork. What happens, whether there's a deferment or a forbearance, at the end of that time period, they capitalize the interest back into your principal. So you're paying interest on interest. Now, with federal loans, the default consequences could be severe. But it does show also the flexibility. You miss a payment, you are delinquent. Okay, with some private loans, you miss one payment, you're in default. 90 days of no payment, the servicer reports you to the credit reporting agencies. 270 days of no payment, you're in default. Now here's where it gets a little dicey. There is no statute of limitation on federal loans, which means they could come after you 25 years later, which, like when you're ready to collect your Social Security. All right, they don't even have to go to court to nail you. All right, they could do an administrative wage garnishment on 30 days notice, 15% of your take home, and you can't consolidate your debts after an AWG is in effect. They could intercept your tax refund. They can intercept 15% of Social Security over 750, except SSI. Or they can sue you. You would be denied federal employment if you're in default on a federal loan. And here's where it gets, they add on, as soon as they send it over to the debt collector, they add on 20% collection fee. If it's a direct or FFEL, 30% on a Perkins. And that's for the first one, it's 40% for the second time. Can you settle a federal loan? And this, I get a lot of frustration from people calling me up. I'll just give it a little aside. You can settle with a lump sum payment private loans. They will accept, they'd rather get rid of you. So you can probably get rid of those for 50, 60 cents on the dollar. The feds, no way. First of all, you have to be in default in order to have them agree to a settlement. If you're dealing with the Department of Education, it's 100% of principal and interest with no collection fees. Then there's another regulation that says 100% of principal and 50% of interest with no collection fees. And then there was a third regulation that said 90% of principal and interest. Why? Who knows? They just redid their regulations and they never eliminated the ones prior to that. Usually that has to be payable within 90 days. So if you're talking, you're going to be paying roughly over 90% of your loan back. FFEL can go down to 70% under the regulations, but they never do it, because why would a guarantee agent agency take 70% from you when they can just turn it over to the government, and the government gives them probably about 95%. So there are hardly ever any FFEL settlements. Can you get out of default with a federal loan? You can. First, you can consolidate your loans, and if you go into an income-driven repayment plan, you don't have to make any payments as a precondition. If you go into a standard or graduated, you have to consolidate and make 3 payments. They take out the collection fee, but they add an 18.5% additional fee onto that. All right? You cannot consolidate Parent Plus loans into other loans. If you do, it contaminates the whole system. You can also rehabilitate. Now, why would you say, well, I could do consolidation. Why am I going to rehabilitate and pay 9 payments? Well, if you've already done a consolidation and you go into default again, you can't do a consolidation a second time. So they want reasonable and affordable payments. There was a lot of litigation on what that meant. And what it's come down to mean right now, it's 15% of your AGI minus the poverty level. If you don't make that much money, you have to submit all your financials to the servicer, and they may come up with a better plan for you. There is a cure fee of 16%, but starting in 2014, they eliminated that. Most of the people that I've dealt with on this were all on a listserv. They're saying any day now they're going to reinstate that cure fee, okay? If you get through the 9 payments, your default is taken away. They will erase the default from your credit report, but they will still list the missed payments, but it won't say default. Once you're out of default, you can apply for an IDR. Now, the one program that seems to make a lot of sense is the Public Service Loan Forgiveness Program, which was started by Bush in 2007. Fed Loan Servicing services all PSLF loans, and they are really horrible. There's more problems about them screwing up paperwork than you can imagine. Basic rules: you have to be a full-time worker for a public service organization, which means a government job or public child or family services. You have to work for, or you can work for a 501c3, but you can't be involved in religious activities. You have to make 120 payments. It has to be a direct loan. The payment options are either a standard or any one of the IDRs. Now, the key to this is if you make your 120 payments, there's no tax consequences. So, wait a minute, if you're paying 120 payments on standard, your loan is paid off because it's 10 years fully amortized. The key to this is to put the student into an income-driven repayment plan where they're being paid, probably pay less than the standard, and the differential is what they save. That could run into a significant amount of money. Federal loans could be discharged if the student dies. Not only is the student off the hook, but the parent is off the hook also. If you have a permanent, total and permanent disability, which means doctors get involved with certifications and all. If the school closes while you're a student or you withdrew within 120 days. And if there's a false certification. Those are usually with private schools, sort of these, ITT type schools. They falsify the students' academic records so that they can get loans for them. That's what usually happens. It also could involve identity theft. The trends, okay? The Republicans introduced the Prosper Act in January. It eliminates all subsidized loans. It eliminates the maze of IDRs. They want to have a single IDR at 15%. There's no forgiveness based on time. You have to pay more in the IDR than you would have paid on a standard, which means a lot of people are going to be paying for the rest of their lives. There's a limit on Parent Plus loans of $56,250. That's probably a good idea because people tend to get themselves in a lot of trouble. But it also means they have to start planning out how they're going to finance their children's education. What they also want to do is eliminate the PSLF program going forward. There's been a lot of pushback on that. And there's a question of whether this bill is going to get through Congress in its current state. What do I do? Well, I do things on two levels. First of all, I meet with students and their parents, and I try to educate them about the law and the process. I explain to them their situation, and I try to give them options. Now, a lot of the students, not so much parents, but students, say, well, I could go on the computer and do this on my own. Well, in that case, they're free to do that. If they want me to get involved, then they sign a retainer with me, and then I do the work for them. The problem that I'm seeing is a lot of people say, I'll do it on my own, I don't want to pay you, and then they call me up 3 or 4 times because they don't know what they're doing. Well, if they're not going to retain me, I don't get on the phone with them. All right, and the problem is that the devil is in the detail. The rules are in legalese. They're sometimes complicated and counterintuitive. The services, as I said, are of no help. And because of the politics, we're dealing with a moving target here. All right, well, that gets us to part 2, so that means I'm done.
I guess that's the next
Any questions?
Next time.
Yes.
Well, first of all, excellent presentation,
Yeah,
thank you.
yeah.
My question for you, are you getting involved with parents before they take out loans or only after the fact?
Well, after the fact, and as a matter of fact, I keep putting off because I've been busy calling up Bob Trace because I know he talks to people beforehand, and it might be a good idea for us to get together and look at this. You know, this is a situation that, well, maybe private people are going to have to come in and talk to them.